Settle in for another night of peaceful sleep with this cozy, romantic bedtime story from Sleepy Dimensions. This story is designed for adults who are looking for a gentle, relaxing escape from the stresses of the day. As always, our sleep stories are crafted to help you unwind and drift into a restful slumber. Tonight's tale is filled with love, warmth, and soft, comforting sounds that will transport you to a serene world. Sleepy Dimensions is dedicated to bringing you relaxing, adult-friendly stories, ranging from gentle love stories to mythological tales and calming fairy tales. Whether you're a fan of romantic narratives or you prefer peaceful background sounds like rain, our videos will guide you into a soothing, deep sleep every night. Now, take a moment to get comfortable. Adjust your blanket, maybe fluff your pillow just a bit. Let your body sink into the bed. Close your eyes if you haven't already. Now, take a deep breath, inhale and exhale slowly. Notice how your body starts to relax, each breath bringing a little more calm, a little more peace. Feel the gentle warmth of your blanket, the softness beneath you, and the quiet around you. This is your time to let go of everything else, to allow your mind to drift and to feel completely at ease. Let the world outside fade as we begin this journey into rest and relaxation. You're safe, you're warm, and there's nothing you need to do right now but simply be here, sinking deeper into the comfort of this moment. Let's begin. The early morning light filtered softly through the curtains, casting a glow with a mild breeze. I packed my bag, ready for the new conquest. I have been studying ancient healing for a long time, and this was my chance to prove that I could live up to the legacy of the ancient healers I admired so much. Thinking this, I wrapped my shawl tighter around me as the breeze whispered through the village, carrying with it a mild chill. I looked outside through a window and saw Max rushing towards my home. Max, my childhood friend. His warmth had been a comfort, but I had never seen it as anything more than friendship. "You're sure about this, Chloe?" he asked, his voice low with sleep. I smiled softly, brushing a strand of my dark hair behind my ear. "I have to. The village isn't close, and Marcus needs me. It's something I have to do." Max sat up, propping himself on one elbow, his eyes searching mine. I could feel the weight of his gaze, even though I wasn't looking directly at him. Max's hand brushed against my arm, remaining a little too long. I could feel his breath, warm against my skin. There was something in his eyes, his worry, his need, the quiet desperation of not wanting to let go. But I couldn't stop thinking about Marcus, the ancient warrior who has been cursed for more than 1,000 years. I stood up, the morning air cool against my skin as I stepped away from the bed. Max's hand lingered on mine until the last possible moment, our fingers slipping apart slowly, like we were holding on to the last thread of connection. I could feel his eyes on me as I walked toward the door, the space between us stretching. "Chloe," he called softly. I paused, turning back to him. "Yeah?" "Come back soon," Max said, his voice quieter now, as though he was afraid the words would shatter in the breeze. He didn't have to say it, but I knew. I always knew. Max had loved me for as long as I could remember, but he had never confessed. And now, here we were, standing on the edge of something bigger than us. I met his gaze, the weight of his unspoken words hanging between us like the mist in the air. "I'll come back," I whispered, though part of me wasn't sure if I would return the same. As I set off, my thoughts drifted to the warrior beast. The last time I visited the nearby village summoned by Alara, an elderly healer. I carried my satchel of herbs and tools, ready to prove myself by healing Elias, a wounded boy. Alara approached me, her voice urgent. "Chloe, there's another. Marcus, a warrior cursed with millions of needles. He's been in agony for 1,000 years, trapped between life and death. Marcus was cursed by a witch from an opposing kingdom. He bears millions of needles pierced all over his body, including his eyes, causing him unending pain and disfigurement. His curse has kept him alive for over 1,000 years, unable to die, but unable to fully live. He is in a coma-like state. He can only be fully revived by a healer who will progressively weaken as they heal him. The last stage of healing involves removing the final needle from his eyes, at which point a kiss from Marcus can only fully heal the healer." Her words stirred something deep in me. Despite my fear, I had to help. "I need to see him," I said. In a dim room, Marcus lay unconsciously in bed. When I touched his hand, a vision struck me. The most handsome being on earth, a warrior, holding a sword, fighting the enemies, riding a black horse broken by dark magic. I pulled back, shaken. "I'll think about it," I told them. But late that night, I couldn't stop thinking about him. I could leave him, go back to my life. But my grandmother's words echoed. Healing is a choice, even when it hurts. I had made up my mind. I was going to heal him. Lost in my thoughts, I didn't even realize I'd reached the village. I took a deep breath and made my way toward the village. The villagers welcomed me with a warm smile, and I could see the hope in their eyes. Alara approached me, taking me to Marcus. The villagers followed us. He was sleeping, or maybe more than that, locked in some kind of ancient magic. I was told that no one had been able to wake him for centuries. His massive frame covered in needles, hundreds of them. His eyes were closed, the weight of centuries visible in his expression. even in his cursed state, gently easing it from his skin. Healing him was no small task, and every day that passed, I grew weaker. Every day I worked to heal him, this beast who never spoke, whose eyes remained covered by needles that held him in some cursed sleep. Each day, I worked tirelessly to pull out each needle gently and smoothly from his skin. I gathered herbs from the surrounding fields. I can't say exactly when it happened, but somewhere between treating his wounds with the gentle herbal medicines and the quiet conversations, I started to fall for him. I actually started loving him. Sometimes I'd find myself lost in thought, imagining the day he would rise strong and whole. I mixed herbs with my hands, gently rubbing on his skin for relief, hoping that my efforts would somehow make him see me. The house felt both a sanctuary and a cage as I worked tirelessly, growing weaker by the day. My body was breaking, but the thought of him, of the way he might look at me, thank me, maybe even more, kept me going. One evening, after treating Marcus with the herbal medicines, I went to take a peaceful bath in a bathtub, trying to scrub away the day's work. Marcus lying on the bed. His dark hair fell in thick curls around his cheeks, and his expression neutral and emotionless. My mind wandered. My fingers absent-mindedly trailed over my skin, and I found myself thinking of him. The beast. I imagined him touching my face softly, his hand rough from years of battle, but tender when it came to me. That quiet closeness we had without words. Maybe when he finally opened his eyes, he'd appreciate all that I had done. A knock at the door startled me out of my thoughts. "Chloe," a familiar voice called. Amaira. She stood there with that gentle smile that never quite reached her eyes. Amaira had been a friend, or so I thought. She came to check on me often, but there was something about her that felt off. Still, I welcomed her in. It was nice to have someone to talk to, even if her words sometimes felt like they were meant to weigh me down rather than lift me up. "Still at it, huh?" she said, her eyes wandering over to the beast lying there as if it amused her. "You really think you'll get him back?" I forced a smile. "I have to believe that." She laughed lightly, almost like she pitied me. "You're a strong girl, Chloe. But sometimes, well, sometimes strength isn't enough." I said nothing. I didn't need her doubt in my head. Days passed, and I poured myself into the task, even as my hands shook with weakness. I was making something special for him, a sweater. Something soft and warm, something I could give him when he finally woke up. I wanted him to know that I had thought about him, cared for him. I knitted through the nights, each stitch a small hope that he would understand. The final day came, the day to remove the last needle from his eyes, and I was too excited to pull the last needle, and what it would when he opens his eyes and gaze at me. But I had run out of wool, so I hurried to the market, eager to finish what I started. I didn't want to leave him for long. When I returned, the air felt different. The house was quiet. I stepped inside and saw her. Amaira. Standing over him, her hand already on his face. His eyes, those deep, dark eyes, were open. I froze in the doorway as I heard her say, "It took more than a year to remove all the needles." Marcus, his name was Marcus, stood tall now, his body fully healed. He was handsome in a way I hadn't imagined, his strength clear in every line of his form. He looked at her, gratitude softening his features. "Thank you," he said, his voice like gravel smoothed over by time. The affection in his gaze twisted something deep inside me. I felt my chest tense with a million things I wanted to say to Marcus, but I couldn't. My gaze fell to the ground. Amaira turned to me, smiling as if none of this was strange. "Chloe, I was just telling Marcus about how I helped him." Helped him? She didn't even blink at the lie. I stood there, the sweater in my hands suddenly feeling too heavy. I made this for you," I said quietly. I offered the sweater to Marcus, and he took it without much thought, too focused on Amaira. I left without waiting for anything else, my heart breaking a little more with every step. Back in my hometown, Max was there for me, as he always had been. But deep down, he knew that I have fallen for Marcus. He made tea, fussed over me, and did everything he could to make me feel better. But nothing worked. My health was failing, and the energy I had spent healing Marcus drained me more each day. Max sat by my side, his presence comforting, but never enough to fill the void Marcus had left behind. He tried to distract me, talking about old memories, as making me laugh like he always did. But all I could think about was Marcus, how he had risen, how he had looked at Amaira with such warmth. I wondered if he ever thought of me. One evening, as I lay in bed, Max's hand resting gently on mine, I closed my eyes and imagined Marcus. The feel of his hand brushing against my skin, the way he might pull me close, the way he'd kiss me if he ever knew what I had sacrificed for him. I should have been content with Max's touch. It was warm, safe, but it wasn't the touch I longed for. My mind kept drifting back to the beast who was now a man, even though he no longer belonged to me. Months later, Marcus came. He arrived with the same intensity I had always imagined he'd carry, but his eyes were different this time, haunted. Alara had told him the truth. The truth about me, about Amaira. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice thick with regret as he stood by my bedside. I wanted to be angry, to push him away for not seeing me sooner. But all I felt was relief. He had come back. He was here. He knelt beside me, his hand covering mine. And for the first time, I felt a spark of warmth that I thought I'd lost forever. He leaned in. his forehead resting against mine, and whispered, "I was a fool, Chloe. Can you forgive me?" Saying this, he moved his fingers around my lips with a soft, almost reverent gesture, like he was afraid I might disappear if he wasn't careful. I could feel my breath catching in my throat. His lips found mine, soft at first, gentle in a way that felt almost cautious, like he was still afraid of breaking me. The moment he kissed me, it was like something inside me snapped back into place. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt stronger, as if my health improved a little. Tears welled in my eyes, but I smiled softly. "You're here now. That's all that matters." As the days passed, I began to heal. Not just physically, but in a way I hadn't expected. Marcus stayed, and with him, the weight of the past slowly lifted. He had returned to me. Marcus and I would find a way forward, together. And Max would always be there. A quiet, steady presence in my life. It was the month of October. The air had just the right amount of crispness that made you want to pull your jacket a little tighter. The cool breeze brushing against my face, the scent of dried leaves spreading through. I sat there alone, in the museum surrounded by the cold stone relics of a forgotten world, poring over my notes like I had so many times before. Ancient Egypt was my obsession, but lately it felt more personal, like something was pulling me in deeper than ever. Especially the coffin in front of me, the one I had been studying for months. There was something about it that always gave me a strange feeling, like it held a secret that was almost within reach. I leaned in closer, running my fingers lightly over the hieroglyphics engraved on its surface. Everything seemed the same, but then something caught my eye. The amulet resting beside the mummy, it wasn't where I remembered. It had shifted, ever so slightly. At first, I thought maybe I'd just missed it, but I was sure. I'd spent hours cataloging every inch of that coffin, and I knew its layout by heart. This wasn't my imagination. But then I shook it off. I was probably just tired, right? Spending too much time cooped up in the dark corners of the museum could do that to anyone. I closed my notebook as I walked home. I felt a presence just a step behind me. Someone was watching me. I was sure of it. Every turn I took, every alley I crossed, there was this weight, like a pair of unseen eyes on my back. I told myself it was nothing, just a trick of my imagination. But the feeling wouldn't leave. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, there was nothing there, just the flickering streetlights and the sound of my own footsteps. I tried to laugh it off, but it didn't stop. Days passed, and the feeling only grew stronger. At school, at home, even in the shower. I'd feel it, a presence, just outside my line of sight. I never saw anyone, but I always felt like someone was watching me, waiting. The hairs on the back of my neck would stand up, my pulse quickening for no reason. One night, Kyle, my boyfriend, came to see me while we were having dinner. He listened, concerned, but he didn't seem to take it as seriously as I wanted. "You're just stressed," he said, reaching across the table to take my hand. His touch was warm, grounding. "You've been working too hard on this thesis, Etta. You need to relax." I smiled at him, trying to believe him. But even as we sat there eating and talking about the Halloween masquerade party we planned to go, I couldn't shake the feeling. Someone was out there, watching. We talked about costumes, what we'd wear, how we'd match, and after dinner we settled into the couch. "Do you think I can pull off a vampire?" he asked, grinning as he leaned in, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder. "I think you'll look ridiculous," I teased, my voice softer than I intended. His hand lingered, his fingers tracing slow circles along my shoulder. The warmth of his touch seeped through my skin, and I leaned into him, letting the familiar scent of him wash over me. His warm hand found mine, fingers brushing slowly up my arm as he leaned in. His touch was soft, familiar. We were inches apart when I pulled back suddenly. "What's wrong?" he asked, his brow furrowing. "I don't know," I whispered, glancing toward the window. The room was dimly lit, and shadows played tricks on my eyes, but I swore I saw movement outside. "I just feel like someone's watching." Kyle glanced around the room, then back at me with a small smile. "Babe, no one's watching us. You're safe." I wanted to believe him, but I couldn't, like it wasn't just us in that room. I forced a laugh and leaned into him, letting his arms wrap around me, hoping it would chase away whatever this strange feeling was. Later that night, the water in the bathtub was warm. It felt good. The bathroom was quiet, the water lapping gently against the tub as I sank in, my body relaxing into the warmth. For a moment, everything felt okay. I let my head fall back, eyes closed, trying to forget about everything. Just the heat, the soft splash of water, and the quiet. But then, it happened again. There it was again. That feeling. My eyes snapped open, my breath catching in my throat. The room was filled with steam, and everything was blurry. I stared at the door. A tall figure appeared through the mist. My pulse quickened, panic rising in my chest. He was there, standing at the edge of the tub, tall, very tall, dark, and unmoving. I froze, the fear coursing through my veins like ice. His face was obscured by shadow. I couldn't make out his features. But I could feel his eyes on me, burning with a strange intensity. My breath came in shallow gasps as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. And then he moved. Slowly, deliberately, He reached out, his hand extending toward me. His fingers were long, rough, and cold, brushing against my lips in the gentlest of touches. He slowly whispered, "Anat," in my ears. His voice too deep and painful, as if it carried pain for centuries. I wanted to shout, ask him millions of questions. The world spun around me, the steam swirling in the air as my vision blurred. The last thing I saw before everything went black was his hand, pulling away as my consciousness slipped. When I woke, the bathroom was empty. I glanced around, desperate to convince myself it had been a dream, but the water still rippled as if someone had just left. I wrapped myself in a towel, feeling a cold. Maybe I was in the water for too long. But the memory of his touch remained, a phantom sensation on my lips that wouldn't go away. Something had changed. I could feel it deep inside me, and I knew that whoever he was, he means no harm to me. The only thing I couldn't figure out was, what does he want? The whole night I was up, staring at the ceiling, wondering who he was. Why did he whisper Anat in my ears? Anat is some Egyptian name. It was the day of Halloween party. I wanted to look like a dream tonight. After weeks of planning, I was determined to be the center of attention at this masked party. So I'd gone all out. My dress was the color of twilight, rich, deep purple, shimmering as it caught the light. It flowed in soft waves down to the floors, and I had it custom tailored to feel like it belonged in a fairy tale. Tonight, I wasn't just Edda. I wanted to be someone from another world. I thought of Rapunzel as I carefully curled my hair. It was long enough, not golden like hers, but I wanted it to feel just as magical. I let the soft, loose waves fall down my back, framing my face in a way that made me feel almost like a princess. My mask was delicate, lacework and silver, a perfect complement to the gown, hiding just enough to make me feel mysterious. The final touch was the crown of tiny flowers I had woven into my hair, just enough to look like I'd stepped out of a Disney movie. When Kyle saw me, his eyes lit up in that familiar way, the one that made me blush. "You look like you belong in a fairy tale," he said, his voice warm as he reached for my hand. He, too, had put in the effort, well-dressed with a white shirt unbuttoned just below his collarbones. Kyle and I walked hand in hand toward the grand ballroom, the soft crunch of gravel underfoot as we neared the entrance. Inside, the party was already buzzing. People in extravagant masks and colorful costumes swirled around the room, their laughter and chatter blending with the soft music playing in the background. There was something enchanting about it, how the masks made everyone seem different, almost anonymous. I could barely recognize some of our friends. Couples danced across the floor, partners swapping with every turn, and the candlelight flickered against the high ceilings, giving the entire room a golden glow. Kyle pulled me close as the music shifted into a waltz, his hands resting gently on my waist. We moved together, spinning slowly, our steps in perfect sync. He leaned in close, his breath warm against my ear. "You look beautiful tonight, Etta." I smiled, feeling the familiar comfort of his arms around me. "You don't look so bad yourself." We laughed, losing ourselves in the rhythm of the dance, the world around us fading away. For a moment, it was just the two of us. But then, as we turned, I saw him, a man standing on the far side of the room. He was taller than anyone else, easily 7 feet, with broad shoulders. Dressed like Flynn Rider from Tangled, he was every bit the charming rogue. White shirt, brown vest, the whole look. He even carried a little leather satchel. His dark brown hair fell in thick curls around his cheeks. His skin was wheat-colored, which meant he belonged from some foreign land, maybe the Middle East or Asia. His blue eyes were covered with smudged lines tracing his eyelids. It wasn't just any eyeliner. It had that distinct, smoky quality, reminiscent of ancient Egyptian kohl. The black pigment framed his eyes perfectly, sweeping out in a subtle wing that gave him an almost regal appearance. He was glowing under the silver moonlight streaming through the windows. His blue eyes seemed to see straight through me. They locked onto mine from across the room. He was staring right at me. My breath caught for a moment, and I stumbled slightly in the dance, breaking the rhythm with Kyle. I tried to regain focus, but the man's gaze held me captive. There was something about him. Familiar, yet strange. I couldn't place it, but my heart was pounding now, my skin tingling as if I knew him from somewhere. And then, just as quickly as I'd noticed him, he was gone, disappeared into the crowd of dancers. Kyle twirled me again, and this time we exchanged partners as the dance called for it. I smiled politely at the stranger now holding me, but my mind was elsewhere. The tall man. Where had he gone? I looked around the room, my eyes scanning the sea of masks, but there was no sign of him. Just then, I felt a hand on my back, coarse but gentle, guiding me into the next step. I looked up, and there he was. The tall man standing right in front of me, his face now so close I could see every detail. The scar at the edge of his neck, the way his brown hair fell against his cheek, and gazing at those blue eyes made me feel as if I have known these eyes for centuries. He didn't speak, didn't even smile. He just led me into the dance, his movements smooth and controlled, as if we had danced this way 1,000 times before. His hand on my waist was warm, his touch firm but careful, like he was holding something fragile. My body seemed to move on its own, following his lead, lost in the moment. The subtle way he tilted his head as if studying me, it all felt familiar, too familiar. And then, as we turned, his thumb grazed my lips, just for a second, but it was enough to freeze me. I knew that touch. I pushed him a little, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I stared at him, wide-eyed, but he said nothing, just watched me with those intense blue eyes. I backed away, stumbling over my words. I need to go." He didn't stop me, didn't move. He just watched as I fled across the ballroom. I found Kyle near the bar, his arm resting casually on the counter as he sipped his drink, laughing with some friends. I grabbed his hand, my pulse racing. "Etta, what's wrong?" he asked, his smile fading as he saw the panic in my eyes. "There's a man. We danced. And Kyle, I know him. His touch. I've felt it before." He raised an eyebrow, clearly puzzled. "You think it's someone you know? Maybe an ex?" I shook my head, my fingers gripping his tighter. "No, none of them. But it's the same touch. I felt it earlier." Kyle looked around the room, clearly trying to make sense of what I was saying. "Babe, I think you're overthinking it. It's a party. Everyone's in costume. You're probably just spooked." But I knew what I felt. That touch. It wasn't a coincidence. And when I tried to remember harder, when I forced myself to relive that strange night, I knew it was him. The man in the bathroom. I spun around, scanning the room, but the man was gone. Disappeared into the crowd, just like before. My skin tingled with the memory of his touch, and my heart thudded in my chest as I searched, desperate to see him again to make sense of what had just happened. But he was nowhere to be found. Just the hum of the party, the soft laughter of masked strangers, and the distant sound of music. Days passed, and I always felt someone protecting me. Without revealing himself, I was losing my patience. I was desperate to know who he was. That night at the bathroom, he stared at me, moving his fingers around my lips. That night at the party, the man with the blue eyes and the Egyptian kajal, his presence had stayed with me, and I could clearly see those eyes longing for me. Deep down, I knew he meant no harm to me. But every time I opened one of the ancient texts or studied the coffin in the museum, I could feel him. It was almost as if his gaze brushed over me, softly but persistently, like a whisper in the back of my mind. I knew something was going on. I just didn't know what. One evening, while flipping through yet another page about Egyptian burial rites, the ground beneath me began to shake. My books fell to the floor as the tremor grew stronger. An earthquake, small at first, but it picked up in intensity. The books flew off the shelves. Glass shattered somewhere behind me, and I barely had time to save myself. I stumbled toward the door, but just as I reached for the handle, the ceiling cracked and debris came crashing down. But just as I thought it was over, I felt it, a strong, firm grip on my waist, pulling me backward, away from the danger. His arms wrapped around me from behind, strong and steady. My breath caught in my throat as his body shielded mine. His presence felt safe, not overpowering. As he made sure I was out of danger, the way his chest rose and fell against my back as he breathed. For a moment, the chaos around us seemed to fade away, and all I could focus on, his warm breath on my neck. His touch felt familiar. I slowly looked up and I saw the faded scar again. It was the same man I saw in the Halloween party. Then, in a breath, it was over. The tremors faded, the room stilled, but he didn't pull away. His body stayed close, his forehead resting against mine. "Kemet," he whispered before his knees buckled, and he collapsed in my arms. The next morning, I woke up, my head still spinning from everything that had happened. When I turned over, there he was, lying beside me, unconscious. Bruises covered his arms, and he looked like he'd been through hell. Panic surged through me. What if he didn't wake up? Without thinking, I grabbed my phone and called the doctor, my voice shaking as I tried to explain what had happened without sounding insane. After the doctor had left, leaving behind a bunch of medical supplies and strict instructions to let him rest, I sat beside Kemet, waiting for him to wake up. His breathing was steady, but he looked so fragile, so human in that moment. I had no idea who he was, or why he saved me. But I couldn't deny the pull I felt toward him. Finally, his eyes fluttered open, and he blinked at me like he was waking from a long dream. "Who are you?" I asked. "And what do you want from me?" For a moment, he just looked at me, his eyes clouded like he was holding the tears. It was something that I couldn't quite read. Then, in a voice so soft I almost missed it, he said, "I am Kemet, and I've come for you, my love." "Your love?" I echoed, feeling like I had missed something huge. "I don't even know you." He gave me a sad, tired smile. "In this life you are Edda. But in another life, long ago, you were Anat. My Anat. And I loved you." I shook my head, trying to make sense of what he was saying. "I'm not Anat. I'm me. Edda. You've got the wrong person." Kemet's smile faltered, but his eyes remained steady, searching mine. "No," he said quietly. "I know you. I've searched for you across lifetimes." "It started years ago," Kemet continued, his eyes looking far off as if he were reliving every moment he was about to describe. "I loved someone once. Her name was Anat. She was beautiful, from a wealthy family in Egypt. We were in love, but her family didn't care about love. They married her off to some rich man." I swallowed hard. My chest tightened at the thought of what that must have felt like for him. The pain in his voice was unmistakable. "She couldn't bear it," he said, his voice quieter now, raw. "She took her life." My breath hitched. I could feel his pain like it was tangible, like I could reach out and touch the sorrow he was carrying all these years. I wanted to say something, but the words stuck in my throat. "I was shattered," he whispered. There was nothing left for me. I didn't want to live in a world without her. I felt a tear escape down my cheek. He hadn't even gotten to the worst part, and already I couldn't bear it. "So I went to a witch," he said, turning to face me, his eyes locking onto mine. There was something almost haunted in his expression, a deep grief mixed with desperation. I asked her for a curse. Not on anyone else, but on me. I told her I didn't want to die until I could be with Anat again. In another life. I blinked, trying to process what he was saying. A curse? The words felt foreign, unreal, like something out of a story. But looking into his eyes, I knew this was real to him. Every word. The witch gave me this. Kemet pulled him out the amulet, the same one I had touched. It felt like ages ago now, but I remembered that moment clearly, the way something in me shifted the second my fingers brushed against it. She told me I'd be cursed to sleep, that I would rest in a coffin, lifeless, until Anat's soul returned. Until she, in her next life, touched this amulet. Only then would I wake up. Only then would I know who she was. My heart raced. The amulet. That was the connection. That's why he had woken up when I touched it. And when I touched it, I whispered, barely able to say the words out loud. When you touched it, I woke up, Kemet said softly, his eyes searching mine for something I wasn't even sure I had to give. That's when I knew. You are Anat. In this life, you're Edda. But your soul, it's hers. I felt a strange sensation, a pull towards him. Flashes of memories that didn't belong to me flickered in the corners of my thoughts. Sand, heat, the feeling of warm sun on my skin, and a man beside me. Kemet. His name felt familiar now, like it had always been there, just out of reach. I closed my eyes, my breath catching in my throat. But I'm with Kyle, I whispered, more to myself than to him. I love him. Kemet's expression shifted. Hurt flickered in his eyes. I saw you with him, he said softly. At the apartment, when he visited, I saw the way you looked at him, but I didn't want to interfere. My presence around you, even when you don't see me, isn't intentional. It's like I am drawn to protect you, to be close, but I never wanted to violate your space. That day, I thought to reveal myself, but the moment you lost consciousness, I knew it was not the right time. He said, I didn't do anything wrong, my heart heavy with guilt. The guilt of hurting Kemet unknowingly. He said, I love you, Anat, and I always have loved you. The memory of his touch, light as a breeze but unmistakable, rushed back. I had felt it, even though I hadn't seen him. Something about his words, about him, felt too familiar, like I'd known him long before I had met Kyle, or anyone for that matter. I didn't want to believe it, but part of me, somewhere deep inside, did. I had been dreaming of this touch, of this gaze, without even knowing it. That night, I couldn't sleep. His words played over and over in my mind, like a song I couldn't shake. Was it possible? Could I have been someone else, somewhere else, in another life? I could feel a pull toward him, like I was being drawn to a piece of myself I had lost. Days passed, and I found myself spending more and more time with Kemet. His presence felt comforting, like something I had been missing without realizing it, and it was never enough. At first, it was just conversation, him telling me about the life we had lived, the times we had shared as Anat and Kemet, and how the stars once shone over us. His memories were vivid, like scenes from a dream he couldn't forget. And soon, I found myself filling in the gaps, too. There were moments when I'd look at him, and it all felt so right. And in these moments, I almost forgot Kyle, the man I once loved. We had unnecessary arguments. Whenever he asked to go out with me, I would make some excuses. But then, things got complicated. I felt comfort in Kemet's arms, forgetting Kyle. But then things got complicated. I felt comfort in Kemet's arm, forgetting Kyle. One night, Kyle visited my apartment. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "Yeah, I'm fine," I lied, forcing a smile that felt more like a grimace. He stepped closer, concern etched across his features. "You don't look fine. I've been worried about you." His gentle touch on my arm sent a jolt of conflicting feelings through me. I craved his warmth, but the weight of my guilt pressed heavily on my chest. "Kyle, we need to talk." His eyes narrowed slightly and he nodded. "Okay, what's on your mind?" I sat on the bed, feeling like I was perched on the edge of a precipice, ready to tumble into a chasm of uncertainty. "I've been feeling confused about us." "Confused?" He sat down beside me, his voice steady. "About what? Etta, you can tell me anything." Taking a deep breath, I finally admitted, "I've been thinking about Kemet a lot, more than I should. And I feel guilty about the intimacy we've shared." Kyle's expression shifted, a mix of hurt and understanding in his eyes. "I see. You feel like you've betrayed me?" "Yes," I whispered, my voice breaking. "And it's not fair to you. You deserve someone who is completely all in, not someone who is divided." He nodded slowly, his brows furrowing in thought. "Etta, I care about you. I really do. But I need you to be honest with me. If your heart is somewhere else, I can't keep pretending like everything's okay. It hurts too much." "I don't want to hurt you," I said, tears spilling down my cheeks. You mean so much to me, but I can't ignore what I feel for Kemet. Then maybe it's time for us to take a step back, Kyle said softly, his voice laced with pain. I don't want to hold you back if your heart is somewhere else. Kyle and I drifted apart. Breaking up with him was one of the hardest things I'd ever done, but it was the right thing. I didn't feel the same anymore. That night, as we sat on the sand, at the edge of the shore, the cool ocean breeze brushing past us, I poured out everything that had happened between me and Kyle. I stared up at the stars scattered across the endless sky, but all I could think about was him. His warmth, the way his hand rested on mine, the way everything seemed to fall into place when he was near. Kemet was holding me tight in his arms, but he was not there with me. His mind was somewhere else. I asked him about what happened to him. He said, looking at the stars, "It feels surreal to me too, but you should have not broken up with Kyle." "What?" I said in a soft tone. "Yes," he said. "I have been too selfish in getting my love back. I forgot the cost of being together." "What do you mean? You deserve happiness too," I said. "But at what cost, Edda? Every moment we share brings me joy, but I can't ignore the danger that follows. I've been thinking only of my feelings, forgetting that your safety comes first," he said, avoiding my gaze. Frustration wells up inside me. I felt torn between my love for him and the harsh reality he describes. "You're not being selfish. You're human. We all want love, Kemet. But that doesn't mean we should turn away from it just because it's hard." He gazed at me, holding my arms. "If I embrace this life, if I become fully human, I risk exposing you to everything dark and dangerous that lurks in my past. I can't let that happen," he said with clouded eyes. I was so madly in love with him that I was ready to sacrifice anything for the sake of our love. But Kemet didn't agree, I said. "I can handle danger. I've faced so much already. You taught me that love is worth the fight. I won't back down now." For a moment, his eyes softened, and he pulled me close, cupping my face. "You have so much strength, and that's what makes this even harder. I wish I could be the man you deserve without all this baggage. I wish I could guarantee your safety." Kemet pressed his forehead against mine, closing his eyes. "I love you too much to stay," he whispered, his voice thick and eyes cloudy. "Goodbye, Anat." And then, just like that, he was gone. Disappeared into the night, leaving nothing but the memory of his warmth beside me. I stood there for what felt like hours, staring at the empty space where he had been. My heart ached, my chest tight with the weight of all the things I couldn't say, all the things I couldn't change. "Goodbye, Kemet," I whispered into the silence. But there was no answer. Only the quiet and the stars above, shining down like they had been watching the whole time.